Hello and welcome to our first art journaling page for July. I am starting with a 9-inch by 12-inch piece of Canson watercolor paper, and there's kind of some funny steps in here. If you're going to follow along with me and recreate this page, I would definitely suggest to watch the video first. I will do a couple steps that I basically just end up covering up. So, you know, it's one of those things, work in progress and filming, and it's not, I didn't do the page and then redo it for filming. So there are a couple things that I end up not doing at all. But so just like that, I had stamped down some new stamps of mine that I designed for Viva Las Vegas stamps. And then I realized that I never gessoed my paper, and I really wanted to play with this new saying that I put on another plate. And so when it comes to designing plates, I can either design all the stamps on a plate, I can design 1, 2, 3, none. You know, there are plenty of plates where I don't even design any of the stamps. But there was this plate that I put together that was very nautical feeling, and there's a really cool learning to sail my ship saying. So I decided I was going to go that route, and I wanted to play with some acrylics and get like a really cool flowy background. So I stamped that first stamp, and then I realized I really wanted to get some gesso on there, so I covered the whole thing with gesso, and then instead of bringing that stamp back out to stamp on top, I decided I would kind of leave it in the background, very distressed and kind of hard to see. And then I stamped with some archival ink, Black Soot by Ranger, with another stamp from that plate 1495. So it's kind of got a bunch of little like crosses or plus signs depending on how you look at it, and it's a really cool background piece. And then after I have that stamped, I kind of whitewashed it with a little bit of gesso to help it blend into the background. So just some like layers on layers on layers. At this point, I can already tell you I wouldn't have stamped that stamp in the top left corner because it doesn't even really show up. Here I got out 4 colors of paint. I got out these 2 paints by Waverly, and you can see them in the supply list. And then, so it's kind of like a teal, like a stormy teal color, and then a warm gray. And then I thought a good complement would be the sky color from Dina Wakley and the elephant. And I end up not using the sky color. I try it out and I don't really like it, but I do use the elephant quite a bit in conjunction with that other gray and this teal. So there's that sky. It was just a little too bright, so I added some gray to it, and then it ends up being really close to that Waverly paint anyways. So I am kind of going back and forth here with the paint on my page and kind of putting it down and adding some water and moving it around, and it just depends on, you know, what the weather's like, how the paint's going to react, and if there's a lot of water or a little water. Depends on how much my page bows. So I end up getting this very cool sort of like swirl in the middle, and you'll see that here coming up. It's really great. It's not something that I can always recreate, but I'm definitely going to try at art journaling class today. While my paint is still wet in some places, I'm using the back end of a paintbrush that I sharpened in a pencil sharpener to make my own mark making tool. I'm using that to scratch into the wet paint. So it's revealing the white gesso underneath, and it's very cool. The marks get super scratchy, and you can see them really well in the detailed shots at the beginning and the end of the video. It's super, super cool. And you could do all kinds of things. Like you could do circles, or you could handwrite, or you could put a message in the background, all kinds of different things. I am using some muslin to sop up some of that extra paint that was happening, because I like to use muslin and fabrics and fibers in my work. So if I use muslin to sop up colors, it's already kind of distressed and fun. This is an UmWowStudio stencil, and I have picked up some of that Waverly gray paint, and I painted it down, and then I used a baby cloth to wipe the paint out of the stencil. Then whatever paint was stuck on the stencil, I stamped on the other side. This is a really cool technique, and I didn't even necessarily go for this, but it kind of reminds me of a net, of netting. It's really cool, which I'm taking this whole thing into a sort of nautical feel anyways, so there you have it. Now, there's another step that you don't have to do if you don't want to, because I did all of these dots in this little mark making, and then I didn't like how it was layering up, so I just erased it, which is fine. You can do that. Like, you don't have to love everything you do. I'm looking through some stencils here, kind of trying to decide what I want, and then I decided to go with something really concentric, like really perfectly round, and then identical as well, because I have some stencils there where some of the shapes are different and different sizes and things like that, but because I had so much going on, I decided that I needed a little balance, so I picked the Chunky Circle stencil by UmWowStudio, and it's just these really thick, huge circles, all like in a nice pattern, like in rows and columns. So I put 5 of those on the page, and I'm kind of going back and forth here, trying to decide what I want to do. And I end up getting that stamp back out that I really, really loved. And I decide to stamp it on a piece of the leftover underpaper. So when I teach this class at art journaling locally, then I will have to give them each a piece of underpaper so that they have this, because this is not something that is like easily recreatable, because it's so random. And when we as designers and artists try to plan something out or try to not plan it, it ends up being planned. So with the scraps of paint that were left over on my underpaper, I stamped that giant text scallop, that text type scallop on it, and then now it matches the page totally unintentionally, but it's got all the right colors. It even has the gray, a little bit of the gray newsprint showing through. So then now I can replace that stamp that I had done in the beginning in the top left corner. And here I've got out a paint, a Sharpie paint pen, and I'm using it to do some mark making, which is a little hard to see, I think, in the video maybe, but I will, it'll definitely be in the close-up shots at the beginning and the end of the video. So just adding some dots kind of all over around those circles and then up along the other side. You'll find in my work that I do a lot of things in groups, basically like a group on the left and a group on the right, so that everything kind of plays together really well. I had some of that paint from priming my paint pen left over, and because I'm moving sort of in a stormy sort of way, I decided to kind of put forth the idea that maybe this storm is a little scarier than we had, or than I had originally intended. So there's some snow at the top, or maybe some really heavy raindrops, just sort of like mimicking the feel. They're not exactly raindrop specific or snow specific shaped, but this is some colored charcoal that I have. It's a very cool product. It comes in this huge chunky form, and it's like really fun to hold on to and kind of work with, and it has a very soft feel because it's charcoal. And then I got out this charcoal pencil. You can see I'm using a baby wipe to go in and clean up the middle of those circles, because everything's so powdery and it's sort of started covering up that cool teal color that I had going on there. I'm just using this charcoal pencil to make some marks. So I do a couple things like circle the circles, and I draw kind of a wonky, almost stitch-like piece up the top, and just a couple different things, you know, so a few scribbles here and there. I outlined the scallop again. And then I get out my gesso and I do a little bit of scraping, because if you've been watching my videos, I'll say that gesso is the great equalizer, and it really kind of brings pieces together and just kind of creates a whole cohesive look. I don't know what inspired me to grab these. These are some triangle pieces from UmWowStudio, and they match the Dreamscapes collection that I designed for 7 Dot Studio. And this is the Tri-Geo Mash, and it's like a huge selection of geometric triangles that are kind of layered on top of each other, and different thicknesses and sizes and things like that. I don't know what prompted me to get them out, but they are really cool, and they don't necessarily match what's happening on my page, but I make them coordinate really well. The first step was to cover them in gesso, and then here is the third step that I would suggest you not do. I put some of that turquoise paint, that teal, and I'll have the color in the supplies list, but I put some of that teal paint on them, and then they started to blend in too much. So I didn't like that at all. So I end up scraping some gesso back over it. When you scrape gesso, it's a lot different than if you were to apply it with a paintbrush or a finger. It gets a lot thicker, and it gets like exactly that type of feel, a scraped feel. So it almost mimics stone, kind of, because it's like kind of, it's scrapey. It sounds funny to say like that, but that's just exactly how it is. It's a rough texture. So then I dried it completely with the heat gun, and so then it had some kind of like cool texture going on, and I set that to the side and decided I would get back out my charcoal pencil, which I broke twice. Awesome. Broke that baby twice. Decided I would do some more mark making. So I am now outlining that cool scallop and then putting some little like scribbles, almost like a zigzag stitch. So doing a few little zigzags and just some kind of sketching and mark making with that. And then I am loving how this triangle is looking a lot more now. I had some charcoal powder sitting there from when I broke my pencil. This kind of stuff, you guys, it doesn't happen unless you work, right? Because I broke that pencil and then I had some charcoal powder laying there, and I ran that across the top of these triangles, and then it highlighted the texture in this sort of smoky gray color. It's so cool. And that wouldn't have happened any other day because I broke the charcoal pencil. It's awesome. It's super, super awesome. I'm using some heavy gel, matte gel, to put those down. This is by Golden. And it's looking good. It's really exciting. I did at first think I was done here, but I like to have, not always, but sometimes I like to have a focal point. So then I remember that stamp that had started to inspire me in the beginning, and I got back out that stamp, and it's brand new. This is my first time using it. I stamped it in archival ink on a piece of vintage book text, because if I can't find the words that I want in a book text, I can just stamp them on book text, and then it sort of mimics vintagey anyways. So it's really cool. And then I'm going to cut those apart in a few different ways. I kind of cut some of the different words apart. I want to keep it in the same sequence, but I wanted there to be a little variation in the words themselves. And I decided to kind of nestle them down next to the triangles, above the circles, in this sort of little crevice that I unintentionally created there. And I'm gluing them down with UHU, which is totally my go-to glue when I want my paper to remain papery on top. And by that I mean I don't want to seal it with like some gel medium or matte medium or anything, which is just fine to do as well. Then I decide to circle the end, my ship, and highlight what's happening. And then with a tiny bit of that charcoal powder, I distress just a little bit. Now there is one last thing I did that I didn't show in the video because I did it right before I took the picture. I drew a cute little sailboat right above my words, and the whole thing is done and perfect. All right. Oh, and I drew that with the charcoal pencil. So thank you so much for joining me. Please feel free to subscribe. Check out this video if you're interested in more tips, tricks, and techniques. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you. Bye.